Hey, Pillar Church, it's Carey. I'm going to be going over chapter 31. And so this is the place where we see Jacob more confident in God. And he's more confident because of two particular reasons. Number one, he was running away from his brother who was trying to kill him in Genesis 25 through 27, and God protected him. And he made it safely to his uncle's house, which we see God's hand over him then, because his uncle not only says, hey, you can stay with us, but then he also says to him, hey, I'll actually pay you while you're staying here. And so we see clearly, based on Genesis 28, 12 through 16, that what God said before is happening right there in Jacob's face, moment after moment. And so now you shift to this chapter and you see in verse 3, God says this: return to the land of your father and grandfather and to your relatives there, and I will be with you. And so Jacob now is in a completely different position. He's married. He is married to Leah and Rachel, and he actually has a couple kids now. So he left his parents' house single, and now he has so much more than he could have even, I'm sure, imagined of. And so God is saying he needs to leave. So he tells his wives about the treatment he's been receiving and how he's like, hey, listen, we got to get out of here. And they said, no problem, we'll go with you. And so Jacob recounts some of the things that he's had to endure as a result of being an employee for his uncle. And you see it in verse 38 of some of the mistreatment and why he's wanting to leave as well. So one of the things is that he was cheated of his wages 10 times. Verse 10, verse 38 specifically, he had to work for Rachel, but then he got Leah. And then so he worked another 7 years for Rachel, and then 6 years for the sheep. And so he was just mistreated off of mistreated, which is coincidental because he was the same one that would cheat people. And now he was being cheated. And so you see him make a plan. He tells his wives, we're leaving. They leave while his uncle is on a excursion, I would say. And so the uncle finds out, Laban, he's like, yo, they left. So he goes in hot pursuit with some of his relatives after Jacob. But God actually spoke to Laban saying, do not hurt Jacob. And once again, this is similar to what I talked about before, where God is just covering Jacob. And it really speaks to God's providence, not just over Jacob, but God's providence over his own word. God is very serious in what he says. And when he says he'll do something, he does it, period. And so the chapter actually ends with Jacob and Laban meeting each other because Jacob couldn't get that far with these kids and wives. And they actually make a treaty, which is like mind baffling because in reality, Laban really wanted to harm, if not kill, Jacob. And so you see God's hand over Jacob, but God cares about his promise. Like I said before, his promise was that I would be with Jacob. That's what he says in verse 3. And that's what he does. Why? So that the story of scripture can continue, where God is going to use Jacob to become Israel, and then Israel will become the birthplace of Christ. And so that the family of God can grow more and more into Jews and Gentiles being a part of the house of God. And so that's where you see God doing something so small as to taking care of this one little man to continue this beautiful story of his care, his love, his mercy over people like me and like you. And that's just more and more reason to love him.